My name's Seth Tower Hurd, radio host, writer, TV, film, and music critic. Julia Royce, also radio host, also writer. The new book is Redeeming the Feminine Soul.
Not very often a film and TV critic, though. Every now and then. Every now and then. Yeah, every now and then. I've got a few out there.
Well, as a TV critic, I actually never watched Duck Dynasty.
Yeah.
Just because people are like, oh, that's so cool. You get to do that.
Man, you've
like,
got the beard for it and everything, man.
I do. Well, I live in Wisconsin. If you don't, they actually raise your taxes. So.
Yeah. Okay. You would be perfect on Duck Dynasty, really.
I just never watched the show, and not for any particular reason other than I have so many things I have to watch, and I'm not kind of in an arena where I would review reality television, so I just don't really wind up watching it because I only have so much time for TV, and part of that TV is work.
I got you. I've actually never watched a full episode, I confess.
But I feel like I kind of know what the family's about. And
yeah.
I mean, I've seen the catchphrase hats in like gas stations back when they were so huge, right? Missy Robertson said, I'm a true feminist and God is pro-choice. I mean, based on everything I know about, this family that has a Christmas album and a devotional Bible, I think, out like the Duck Commander devotional Bible, that seems to be not like something I would ever hear.
Yeah, not what you would expect from Missy Robertson, for sure. But what she was doing is she was taking words that our culture is using, she's co-opting them and giving them new meaning. So when she said, I'm a true feminist, what she said is, I love being a woman. I embrace and I'm proud of being a mother. I embrace the fact that I bear children. And she was speaking at a pro-life rally. And so, again, sort of co-opting this word and using it to mean something other than what culture means it to mean. And then when she said God is pro-choice, what she was saying is, God wants you to have choices other than abortion, which is really the only choice that our culture is giving women who are facing an unplanned pregnancy. It's like, okay, you have an unplanned pregnancy, this is what you need to do. So what she's saying is God is pro-choice in that he's giving us a choice, and he always chooses life. So that's what she meant by it. But the thing that kind of caught my attention with that is that I've been hearing a lot of people saying lately that they're Jesus feminists. And this kind of started with Sarah Bessey several years ago. She published a best-selling book called Jesus Feminist. And she makes the case that feminism, when you boil it right down, all it really means, Seth, is the radical notion that women are people too. And since Jesus loved women, then Jesus was a feminist. And you can be a feminist too if you're a Christian. And
if I go down that road, I have to believe men are people, and then I'm going to have to be nice to humans.
Yeah, with it.
Then I have to be nice to the guy at Starbucks because men and women are people.
That's right. Well, it probably would be a good idea. Yeah. But my point, when I saw that, I said, that's basically like taking Marxism and saying, well, the proletariat are people too. You can be a Marxist if you believe the proletariat are people too, completely ignoring the fact that there's this whole ideology behind it of revolution and class warfare. See, feminism is an ism, which means it's an ideology. It has something behind it. And so you can't just say, I'm a feminist, I'm a Jesus feminist, and it's really just that women are people too, because no, it means something to culture, it means something historically, and there is an ideology, and we need to recognize that.
Okay. You weren't always of this mindset, though, right? Would you say that, when you were younger, you probably had a different take on this?
Yeah, I don't know if I ever would have called myself a feminist. I would say in the church, I lean more to an egalitarian kind of interpretation of Scripture. And egalitarians would say that men and women are equal in worth, but they'd also say they're kind of equal in function. Like you can interchange roles between men and women. Whereas what's called complementarian is sort of the other end of the spectrum, and they would say, no, equal in worth, yes, but we're different in function. Men and women have different functions, so you can't just exchange roles. There needs to be set sex roles.
And if this is like a sliding scale, I feel like you just sort of went over here.
Well, maybe a little bit, and I do in the book, Redeeming the Feminine Soul, I do think that both of them have missed the point. I say that by focusing on sex roles, the complementarians have sort of missed the forest for the trees, kind of the greater and grander vision of gender and sexuality. But by completely eliminating any of the differences, the good and beautiful differences between men and women, the egalitarians have basically raised the entire forest. So there is something, I think, in between both of those that perhaps we've missed in the church. But I really don't think feminism captures it.
Okay. So what are you then?
What am I?
What are you?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's valid. You're not a feminist. You're not an anti-feminist. So what does that make you?
I am someone who believes that God did create us equal in worth, very much so, but equal in function. Yet I don't think obsessing over the functional differences is necessarily the point. The point is that male and female are to together reflect something much larger, a spiritual reality of Christ's relationship to his church, of this Trinitarian life and love. That's the bigger point. And if we focus more on that, then the sex roles that we see, they're not an end in and of themselves. They are actually something that is there to sort of protect the integrity of the symbol. So there is a reason, and I do think God has made us for functional. There are functional differences between men and women, and I glory in those functional differences. I don't think my difference from a man makes me lesser. In fact, I take a lot of pride in what I can do as a woman that a man can't do. And men can do things that I can't do, and I glory in that. And my husband, when I see the way he relates with our children, it's different than me. I love that. And I think that's what we need, is that unity, to work together, to really function in a way that's beautiful and not competition between each other, but really this beautiful unity, and there's a fruitfulness that comes out of that.
You know, what's interesting to me about this topic is there are certain things in American culture that just get beat to death with redundancy of people kind of just yelling the same arguments. And although this is a very different arena, I would say that the NFL protesting stuff going on right now, you know, where it's like week to week, it's like, well, this many players kneeled. Well, some of them sort of half kneeled and then like put their hand on somebody. And I just always want to go, okay, time out. You have all this commentary on this, but like, do you volunteer? Do you help anyone? Do you give money? Because the whole term slacktivism came out of scientific studies that show that the more you're on social media, the less that you tend to volunteer or give money, right? And when we talk about like what I would kind of call the same tired gender roles, I think that a lot of people just argue about them because arguing about them has become a hobby and not because it's helping us move anywhere as Christians. And I try to stay out of conversations with those people. Like they kind of have their line to get you to debate them, and I'm like, well, good luck to you. I mean, you take that all the way. Like, because it's not, you don't want to change my mind. You don't want to change your mind. You just want to battle it out for a little bit because this is like a hobby for you almost. And that's what's so interesting to me about the book is that this is really about trying to move people to see things in a healthy way and to, have healthy persons, like me healthy as a person. And then that overflows into family, friendships, marriage, and church.
Yeah, and Seth, I don't think our culture, even in the church, I don't think we're very happy with the two camps where we've landed. I think women can be reduced in both the complementarian church and both the egalitarian church.
Okay, women can be reduced in the egalitarian church. That's an interesting statement. So,
I think honestly that there's misogyny in both churches, the egalitarian and the complementarian, and they're really just twin sides of the same coin. In the complementarian church, I would say that the common frustration that women feel is, you don't see me as a person. You see me as like a member of a class, and it's a subclass. And even though you say I'm equal, you don't really recognize my gifts, and you don't really invite me in to be a full participant in the life of the congregation here.
Which you have experienced.
I have experienced that,
sure.
Absolutely. But yet you go to an egalitarian church, and it's like, oh yeah, we love women. We absolutely do. We got women on our elder board, but you see that the kind of woman they respect is a woman who's very masculine. So they're not valuing women because they value the intuitive mind. They're not valuing women because they really embrace the nurturing that she brings to the church. They're not asking her to come up, in front of the church and bring maybe a word of wisdom that God's given her uniquely as a woman because she maybe perceives the world a little differently than men. She maybe has a gift that men don't have. It's not like that. It's like, if you can perform like me as a man, then I respect you and I invite you in. But they don't see the ways that they have been misogynistic in that they don't really value feminine virtues on the same level that they value masculine virtues. Case in point, A friend of mine is on staff at a church, and she brought this issue on church staff, and one of the gals who serves with her on church staff said to the pastor, she's like, yeah, for example, sometimes I have a gut feel about things. I have an intuition that something's just not right. And she said, I can't express it. And when I bring it up, like, I can't express it in the way that you want. You want like 10 points and all of the reasons supporting why this is a bad idea. And she said, it's not like that. But I have a sense from God, something's not right. In my spirit, I know it's not right. When I communicate that, it's like I get completely dismissed. And you don't see that as valid. And yet, if you look, and then she cited some things historically where her gut has been right, like God has spoken to her.
You know, that's something that's been really cool. I've been married 2 years, and I've learned to lean into my wife and I are in separate businesses. She's a stylist, an artist, and an illustrator, and I work in kind of the digital space, right? And I've learned to just be okay with, if I'm kind of considering working on something, getting a dinner scheduled with the other parties, and just kind of, not even really talking about a whole lot of business stuff, just kind of hanging out, right? Or going to some kind of social event. Hop in the car on the way home. So who's lying? Because she knows.
Wow.
Right? And the first couple times, I was kind of like bristled at that. And then I'm like, okay, no. Her brain is way more connected between the two hemispheres of mine. And even if she can't explain it, she knows. And so I might as well lean in on that. And, that's fascinating. I would say as a guy, as far as like gender roles, if I wasn't 6'6", played varsity sports, grew up hunting, have a compound bow in the back of my SUV right now.
Very impressive. Very impressive.
I probably would have been severely bullied and made fun of because I was super sensitive. I read a lot. I cried easily. It's just nobody laughs when you're 6.5 feet tall, right? And so because people weren't going to bother me, I was free to, express both sides of my personality. One side which is much more aggressive, and the other side which is much more sensitive. And I cried my eyes out watching the TV show last night, and then did a Facebook post about it, and that was okay because like I'm able to be comfortable. And I get what you're saying about there can also be the other side of things. It's like, well, where women better be take charge, and if you're not take charge, go 100 miles a minute and and make junior vice president of your company by the age of 27, you're not using what God gave you. And that's not like the only path, right? It's not the only way femininity expresses itself.
Yeah, I love what you say about yourself, because to me, sometimes the two words I think that encompass that is a warrior poet. And I think for men, it's a beautiful thing when you have a man who is able, one, to be masculine, because I think that's important as men and women, that we embody our gender in a unique way, yet at the same time, you're not afraid of the feminine, and you're not cut off from it. And what I see a lot in the church is that we've made sort of caricatures out of men and women, where men, kind of have to be Samson and David and slay, wild beasts and Philistines with their bare hands, that kind of man. That's a real man. And they're afraid to express tenderness or compassion. And I tell the story in the book about Brandon Robertson, who to me is a sensitive guy, and a wonderful person, but he was made to feel less than in the church because of that. It was called sissy because he cried at a funeral. That's sad and pathetic when the church treats it that way. But we do see this, men sort of cut off from their feminine, and then we see women, sometimes cut off from the masculine, and they're sort of sickly passive. They're not able to make decisions. They're not able to stand up for themselves. Instead of a fully integrated human being, which is really, when you look at God, he is primarily masculine in the way he relates to us, because he always initiates, we always respond. And I do think initiation is sort of the essence of masculinity. Response is the essence of femininity. But he has both. We see him weeping over Jerusalem, longing to gather her together like a hen gathers her chicks. So he has both masculine and feminine. And if we're to reflect him in his fullness, then we need to have at least some balance of masculine and feminine in us. And I think it'll be different, because we're unique.
Yeah.
And the proportions are a little bit different. But yeah, we need to accept that, and we need to be okay with that.
Dang. That brings up another thing. And I don't mean this to be, derogatory towards the gay community at all, but pretty much every marriage sermon I've ever heard in church, I just walked away being like, okay, so somehow you just think I'm gay, but I'm not. Because it's like,
Wow.
I don't fit like the kind of whole like no emotion, closed off. I'm like, I'm the opposite of those things. And yet you're like, well, you're a guy and this is what's wrong with you. And so you need to be not so closed off and emotionless. I'm like, well, I'm already not those things. And so I don't know what you're wanting me to do here. You seem to...
See, that's such an unhealthy picture. I mean, here we have hazing going on like crazy in our country, right? And now we had an incident of it at an evangelical school, and I don't mean to get into the specifics of that. There's a lot of details that are up for debate with what actually happened. But the point is, that kind of culture of that hyper-masculinity is sick. It is really sick, and it's what's driving some of these hyper-masculinized expressions like hazing, where people actually get killed and damaged for life because of men trying to prove themselves as masculine. I mean, that's a sick masculinity, and we can't be furthering that in the church. But we need to have is an appreciation of one another. But one of the most beautiful pictures of it for me is The Sound of Music, one of my favorite movies. Now, you may hate it because maybe there's a lot of cheesy things about it. I love The Sound of Music.
It's a moment, as a critic, I'd say it's a significant moment in film. I don't know that I pull it out and watch it, but I certainly appreciate what it did.
The one part that I've never heard anybody talk about, and I probably noticed it because this is an area of extreme interest for me. But here you have a woman, Maria von Trapp, who is beautifully feminine, like just so nurturing. So she comes into this home, and there's the captain, right? And the captain's lost his wife. And ever since she died, there's no music in the home. He treats his kids like they're in an army barracks, right? And he has a whistle that he, tries to teach her the whistle calls. Well, here's a woman healthy enough in her feminine, but there is some masculine, where he tells her the whistle calls for each of his children, and she refuses. She says, I would never do that. That's way too demeaning for human beings. She's not going to call them by these whistle calls. But okay, we see this woman, very healthy, but very feminine, but has, again, this masculine strength inside of her. So this climax, to me, one of the best parts, my probably favorite part of the whole movie, is a part that maybe a lot of people don't even notice. But it's when she comes back, she's gotten clothes for these children, because these children haven't been allowed to be children, because, again, he's treated them like they're charges under him instead of his own children. And so she makes clothes for them so that they can play. They don't have any play clothes. They go out there. It's a wonderful, wonderful day. And she's coming back. Maybe remember the scene. They're on the river. They're in canoes. And there's the captain. And he's with his, what would become his fiancée, this very sophisticated baroness. And here's his children. As they approach, they're laughing, having the time of their lives. And the canoe capsizes. They all get soaking wet. And they come in. Of course, he's horribly embarrassed in front of this baroness. And he just confronts Maria very strongly for what she did. And she, in this moment, confronts him and says, here are your children, and they need you, and you need to love them, and you have not loved them. And she says, please love them. And she pleads with him, and he won't have any of it. And it's just an incredibly emotional scene. But what happens is, then he walks in the house, and Maria has taught the children music and taught them this song. He comes in and he hears the music, and he sees his children singing Edelweiss, and something comes alive inside of him. And he's moved deeply, and he has this turning, and you can see it, on his face, that something that he died to, which is really the movement of the feminine in his soul, which he had killed, comes alive in him, and he starts singing with them. And that is a moment in which then he turns and he pleads with Maria to stay. And the whole movie, you see this man, it's not just about them escaping the Nazis and this regime and leaving Austria. It is a story about a man being saved by a woman, that here he was completely cut off from what is made him a human being inside of himself, and she brings it back to him. And that is the beauty of the masculine and the feminine working together, where we call out in a man that beautiful, feminine side of him that hopefully he isn't afraid of and he's able to embrace. And a man can bring out in a woman an ability to have strength and to stand up and to say what she needs to say. But together we do this, and we become better together because we need one another. Not that we're the same, not that we function the same, we are different, but we need each other, and we need each other in our beauty, and we need to value what the other person brings to the table.
Okay, I want to close this on this, because this is, man, I mean, that hit with me enough that I'm a radio host and I'm stumbling because it was so good. But if I look back at, and I haven't read a lot of women's books, but if I look back at kind of what men's ministry was in the church. So in the 90s, you swing like really hard to the be nice side of things. This is where you have the Promise Keepers rallies. And I never went to one. They might have been great. They might have done a lot of stuff. But I know that the branding was sort of like, wear khakis, be nice to people, tuck in your shirt. And then it goes so crazy the other way to where it's like, well, you're not a real man unless you're brewing your own beer and wearing a T-shirt with a dead theologian on it, and and you can have an in-depth discussion about an armbar in UFC, which I'm a huge UFC fan, so I'm not knocking that at all. This is maybe the first moment where, and then it kind of swung back to very kind of sticky, squishy, something else, kind of on the nice side of things, and then the hyper angry side of things. I've seen this, in the last 20 years, take 3 or 4 swings. I feel like this is the first moment where somebody just grabbed the pendulum and kept it still.
Well, I've stood on other people's shoulders, and I will say, with the book, part of my passion, and this has even been my passion in being a radio host, is that I see these voices in the church that are speaking so profoundly. And a lot of this I learned, some of it from Leanne Payne. She's no longer with us, but had a wonderful ministry called Pastoral Care Ministries, wrote some fantastic books. Not enough people have read them. But that impacted me dramatically. And this has impacted me dramatically in my own soul, to be able to integrate both of these movements in my soul and say they're both good and they're important. But yeah, I do think, and I know when I was writing this book, one of the things my agent said was, Julie, I've never heard this before in my entire life, and I've read a lot on women's issues and men's issues, and that is why I wrote the book, because I think this is so crucial. Here we are in a moment. We're in a moment where our society doesn't understand gender, sexuality, manhood, or womanhood, and here we are as a church with the key to it right in front of us, and we're failing to embody it in a way that's compelling to our culture. And we have a moment. This is a moment in our culture where we can capture it, where we can live it, where we can embody it. And I tell you what, it is not in the world right now. But if they see it in our church, and I see it in my local church, we live this, and I see it in such beautiful, beautiful ways. But that needs to spread. We need to understand these things deeply. We have to. Our culture so critically needs it. And God is raising up, I think, a generation of believers to really impact this culture, and so that they can see what's true and what's real.
The book is Redeeming the Feminine Soul. If I can read it in Starbucks and be enthralled and not care what people think, it's probably a little more targeted to women, but I would say guys need it. And the attitude is there. So what? Redeeming the Feminine Soul by Julie Roys, Amazon.com, of course, and wherever physical books are sold.